They send the rejected Omega to clean his barn as a joke, but the Alpha King refused to let her go. The Alpha King, who slaughtered 3 rival packs in one night, just dropped to his knees before the Omega they sent to scrub his barn as a joke, and his guards are watching. Zamaska came here expecting to be thrown out, maybe killed, but when she tried to run at dawn to save his reputation, Heminal tracked her to the border and did something no Alpha King has done in 3 centuries. He begged a rejected Omega to stay. Now the court is assembling for a public claiming. The Eastern Pack is in the hall laughing at her scars, and if he marks her in front of everyone, it could cost him his throne, but he's reaching for her anyway. You found us, and we're so glad you're here. This is where broken girls become queens, where underdogs rise, and where love changes everything. If you've ever felt like you weren't enough, these stories are for you. Subscribe to join the pack. Like if you're feeling it. Comment your thoughts. We love hearing from you. You're not just a viewer. You're family now. Welcome home. Now let's get into the story. They sent the rejected Omega to clean his barn as a joke, but the Alpha King refused to let her go. The Omega quarters smelled like wet fur and stale fear. 8 she-wolves crowded around the fire pit, giggling over a parchment sealed with the royal mark of Fenrich. The Alpha King requires stable hands. Present yourself at dawn. By order of the crown. Stable hands, one girl snorted. At Fenrich? Who's fool enough to work for him? He killed 3 alphas in single combat, another whispered, her eyes wide with delicious horror. In less than an hour. My cousin said his eyes glow red when he's angry. No servant lasts more than a moon in his keep. He drove the last one out with just a look. They all knew the stories. Heminal of Fenrich, the ruthless Alpha King, the monster no wolf wanted to cross. He ruled alone from his black stone keep, fought his wars with brutal efficiency, and spoke to no one unless blood was owed. And now, apparently, he needed help. Who's desperate enough to take that job? One of Beta Changi's daughters asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. The room fell silent. Then slowly, all eyes turned toward the corner. Zamaska sat hunched on a wooden stool, mending a torn blanket. Her hands moved carefully, stitching each frayed edge with patience she'd learned through years of serving in silence. She didn't look up. She'd learned long ago not to meet their eyes. Zamaska, one of the daughters called sweetly. Too sweetly. Zamaska's hand stilled. Her chest tightened. You're not doing anything important tomorrow, are you? Zamaska shook her head slowly, throat dry. Perfect. The daughter stood, ripping the parchment from the wall. You'll go clean the Alpha King stables. Zamaska's throat closed. I can't. Why not? You clean here, don't you? But they say he's mean. The girl laughed, sharp and bright. So what? You're used to mean, aren't you? The others erupted in laughter. Besides, another daughter added, circling closer like a predator, you're built for heavy work, aren't you? All that shoveling, all that bending. More laughter. Look at her, someone whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She can barely fit through the Omega doorway. Imagine her trying to squeeze into the royal stables. Maybe she'll get stuck, another giggled. The Alpha King will have to shift just to pry her out. The room roared. Zamaska's hands trembled. She kept her eyes on the blanket in her lap, stitching faster, harder, trying to disappear into the worn fabric. Her fingers found the scar on her throat, the one she'd clawed there herself 6 moons ago, trying to remove a bond that never took. She pressed against it until it hurt. It's settled then, the first daughter said, tossing the parchment onto Zamaska's lap. You leave at dawn. Don't be late, another added. And don't come back until the joke's done. If he throws you out, or worse, that's your problem. Zamaska opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Just the stutter that always trapped her tongue when she was terrified. The she-wolves turned away, already moving on to the next bit of gossip, the next joke, the next target. Zamaska sat alone in the corner. The parchment crumpled in her shaking hands. She wanted to refuse, wanted to say no, to stand up and walk out. But where would she go? She had no pack, no family, no mate. The Eastern Pack Omega quarters were all she had. And if the head Omega found out she'd refused work, especially work bearing the royal seal, she'd be thrown out by nightfall. So she folded the parchment carefully, tucked it into the pocket of her worn dress, and climbed the narrow stairs to the sleeping quarters she shared with 12 other Omegas. That night, Zamaska lay awake on her thin sleeping mat, staring at the rough wooden ceiling above. The other she-wolves' laughter echoed in her mind. Built for heavy work. Can't even fit through a doorway. The king will have to pry her out. The words cut deeper than claws. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, and whispered into the dark, "Why was I made to be rejected?" No answer came. Just the sound of wind howling through the gaps in the walls, a sound like wolves running far away, toward freedom she'd never know. Dawn broke cold and merciless over the eastern packlands. Zamaska dressed in her oldest work dress, the gray one with patches at the elbows, and tied her dark hair back with a fraying strip of leather. She slipped out of the Omega quarters before the others woke, the royal parchment clutched in her scarred hands. The walk to Fenrike Keep took 2 hours. Her feet ached. Her dress clung to her back despite the cold morning air. With every step, the landscape changed, from the rolling green hills of her pack's territory to the harsh, rocky terrain of Fenrike. The trees grew darker here, thicker. The air tasted like stone and old blood. By the time Fenrike Keep came into view, her heart was hammering against her ribs. The keep was massive, ancient, built from black stone that seemed to swallow light, with towers that clawed at the sky like jagged teeth. Wolves in silver armor patrolled the walls. And at the base of the keep, larger than her entire Omega sleeping quarters, stood the stables, weathered wood and iron, its double doors hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Zamaska's stomach twisted. Then she heard it. A crash, loud, sharp, followed by a roar that shook the very air. Useless piece of... Another crash. Zamaska froze at the stable entrance, her hand gripping the doorframe until splinters bit into her palm. Through the open doors, she could see him. Heminal of Fenrike. The Alpha King was massive, broad-shouldered, towering, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal arms thick with muscle and covered in the silver scars of 100 battles. As she watched, he gripped a broken saddle stand and hurled it across the stable. It smashed against the far wall, splintering into pieces. He stood there in the wreckage, chest heaving, fists clenched, jaw tight enough to shatter bone. His eyes, even from a distance, glowed with barely contained alpha power. Gold and furious. Zamaska's breath caught in her throat. This was the man they'd sent her to. The Alpha King who slaughtered rival packs. The monster who ruled with iron and blood. She wanted to turn around, to run, to disappear back into the hills and take her chances with exile. But then he turned. His eyes locked on hers, gold fading to dark amber, hard and unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The morning air hung heavy between them, thick with tension and the smell of hay and fury. Then Heminal spoke, his voice low and rough as gravel. "What are you doing here, Omega?" Zamaska's mouth opened, but the words tangled on her tongue. I was sent to clean the stables, Alpha King." His eyes narrowed. Sent by whom? The Eastern Pack, Alpha. They said you needed help. Heminal stared at her. His jaw worked. She could see the tension rippling through his shoulders, the alpha power still simmering just beneath his skin, looking for something to destroy. Then he let out a bitter laugh. Short, sharp, humorless. "They sent you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A realization. Zamaska's cheeks burned with shame. She knew what he saw. What everyone saw. The rejected Omega. The one with the scar on her throat. The one no wolf wanted. Fat. Broken. Worthless. A joke. Heminal turned away, running a hand through his dark hair. "Go home, Omega." Zamaska blinked. What? I said go home." His voice was flat, final. "I don't need help from someone they sent as a prank." Her chest tightened. She should leave. Should bow, apologize, and walk away. Go back to the Eastern Pack and face the laughter, the mockery, the inevitable punishment for failing to complete the joke. But then she thought of the Omega quarters. The cruel daughters. The head Omega's warning. No work, no bed. "You know the law." Her voice came out stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I need the work, Alpha King." Heminal stopped. Slowly, he turned back to face her. "You need it," he repeated, his tone unreadable. "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, His eyes traced the scar on her throat, her trembling hands, her worn dress. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to name. Then he pointed toward a broom, leaning against the stable wall. Fine. You want to work? Then work. Don't speak. Don't complain. And stay out of my way. Zamaska nodded quickly, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. Hamanal turned and walked out of the stable toward the fence line, his boots heavy against the dirt, leaving her alone in the wreckage. Zamaska picked up the broom with shaking hands. And for the first time in her life, for the first time since her rejection, since the cruel laughter, since she became the pack's favorite target, she didn't run from the anger. She stood in it. The barn was a disaster. Dust hung thick in the air, clinging to every surface like a curse. Hay lay scattered across the floor in angry piles, as though someone had thrown it in rage. Broken tools leaned against walls. A leather bridle hung from a nail, cracked and neglected. Zamaska returned at dawn. The keep was still wrapped in morning mist when she crossed the courtyard, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Her body ached from yesterday's work, muscles she didn't know she had screamed with every step. But she'd slept in a real bed, had eaten a hot meal in the servants' hall, had woken to sunlight through a window instead of 12 other Omegas crowding around her. She would have crawled to the stables if necessary. The doors stood open, just as they had yesterday. But inside, something had changed. The sections she'd cleaned gleamed in the early light. The floor she'd swept showed the warm grain of old wood. The tools she'd organized stood in neat rows. Her work, had made a difference. For a moment, she just stood there, taking it in. You're early. Zamaska spun around. Hamanal stood in the doorway, blocking the light. He wore simple work clothes, leather trousers, a rough shirt with the sleeves already rolled up. His hair was still damp, like he'd just come from washing. I didn't want to be late, Alpha King. He studied her for a long moment. The feed room needs organizing. Start there. Then he walked past her toward the back paddock, his shoulder brushing hers for just an instant. The brief contact sent warmth flooding through her, followed immediately by confusion. Zamaska shook her head and headed for the feed room. The work fell into a rhythm. Zamaska sorted the grain sacks, separating the damaged from the intact, sweeping up the spilled feed, scrubbing the storage bins until they no longer smelled of mold and mice. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back grew stronger. The work that had seemed impossible on the first day became manageable. Outside, she could hear Hamanal working, the steady rhythm of hammer on fence posts, the creak of wagon wheels being repaired, the occasional low command to one of the horses. But she noticed something else too. Every time she looked up, he was watching. Not obviously, not in a way that made her uncomfortable. Just watching, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She'd be climbing down from the loft and catch his silhouette in the doorway. She'd be hauling water from the well and see him pause in his work, eyes tracking her movement. She'd be organizing tack and feel the weight of his gaze on her back. Each time she noticed, he'd turn away, returning to whatever task occupied his hands. But the watching continued. On the third day, Zamaska was in one of the empty stalls, mucking out old straw that had been left to rot. The smell was overwhelming, the work disgusting. But she'd done worse in the Omega quarters. She didn't hear him approach. You're doing it wrong. Zamaska yelped, dropping the pitchfork. It clattered against the wooden floor. Hamanal stood at the stall entrance, arms crossed. But his expression wasn't angry, just assessing. I'm sorry, Alpha King, I thought. The wet straw. You're trying to lift it all at once. He stepped into the stall, took the pitchfork from where it had fallen. Work in layers. Like this. He demonstrated, using the fork to peel away the top layer of dry straw first, then working down to the wet, compacted layer beneath. His movements were efficient, practiced. See? Less weight. Less strain on your back. He handed her the pitchfork. Their fingers brushed. Zamaska's breath caught. Thank you. Hamanal nodded once, then left without another word. But he taught her, had taken time from his own work to show her a better way. Why would he do that for someone who was just a temporary worker? Just a joke? By the 5th day, Zamaska had fallen into the pattern of a keep. Wake before dawn. Wash in the servants' bathing room. Eat a quick breakfast of bread and broth. walked to the stables as the sun rose. Work. Heminal would arrive shortly after, and they would work in companionable silence, him on the larger tasks that required alpha strength, her on the detailed work that required patience. At midday, he would appear with water. Always water. Sometimes with a piece of bread or dried meat. Eat, he'd say. Not unkindly, just stating a fact. And she would eat, sitting on an overturned bucket while he checked the horses or repaired equipment nearby. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Zamaska found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. Her shoulders didn't hunch automatically when she heard footsteps. Her hands didn't shake when someone addressed her. The constant knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. One afternoon, as she was mending a torn saddle blanket, she realized she was humming. Humming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd made a sound that wasn't necessary, that wasn't calculated to avoid attention or punishment. What's that song? Zamaska's hands froze. Heminal stood in the doorway, a bucket of nails in one hand. I don't know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. He set the bucket down. It's nice, hearing someone content. He said the word like it was foreign, like contentment was something he'd read about but never experienced. Zamaska set down the blanket. Are you not content, Alpha King? The question was bold. Too bold. She should have kept silent, but Heminal didn't seem offended. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression distant. I'm not sure I remember how to be. The vulnerability in those words struck her like a physical blow. This was the Alpha King. The warrior who'd killed 3 alphas in single combat. The ruler who commanded absolute loyalty. And he didn't know how to be content. Maybe, Zamaska said softly, you just need practice. Heminal's eyes met hers. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Maybe, he said. Then he picked up the bucket and walked outside, leaving Zamaska with her heart pounding and her mind racing. On the 7th day, Zamaska arrived to find a pair of work gloves waiting on the stable workbench. They were worn but sturdy, the leather soft with age. She picked them up, confused. Whose were these? They're yours. Heminal emerged from the tack room, carrying a saddle that needed oil. I noticed your hands. The blisters. Zamaska looked down at her palms. The blisters had mostly healed, replaced by growing calluses. But they were still tender. You got these for me? They were just sitting in storage. He set the saddle down, not meeting her eyes. Might as well be used. But she could see the lie in the tension of his shoulders. These gloves weren't from storage. They were too well maintained, too carefully chosen for her hand size. He'd gotten them for her. Or made them. Or something. Thank you, she whispered. Heminal grunted and turned away. But she saw it, just for a moment, the softening around his eyes. That night, Zamaska lay in her narrow bed, the work gloves folded carefully on the chest beside her. Through the window, she could see Heminal's silhouette on the battlements as always. Standing watch. Standing alone. The Eastern Pack had sent her as a joke. Expected her to fail, to be thrown out, to give them another story to laugh about over dinner. But the Alpha King had given her water, had taught her better ways to work, had noticed her blistered hands and done something about it. She pressed her hand to her chest, where her heart beat like a drum. What's happening? She whispered to the darkness. On the battlements, the lonely king stood watch. And in her small room, the rejected Omega felt the first fragile stirrings of something she'd thought was dead forever. Hope! 3 more days passed. The stables transformed under Zamaska's steady hands. What had been chaos became order, tools gleaming in their proper places, hay stacked in neat rows, the floors swept clean each evening. Even the horses seemed calmer, no longer skittish when she approached. Heminal's commands grew shorter, less frequent. Not because he was displeased, but because she'd learned what needed doing. Adequate work became good, became simply a nod of approval as he surveyed the day's progress. And every midday, without fail, he brought her water. It became a ritual neither of them named. He would appear, cup in hand, while she worked. She would drink. Sometimes they would exchange a few words, observations about the weather, a horse's health, the quality of the new hay shipment. Sometimes they simply stood in comfortable silence. The palace staff noticed. Zamaska heard them whispering when she passed through the corridors to and from the servants' hall. Felt their eyes tracking her when she fetched water from the well. The young servant girl who'd shown her to her room, Mara, she'd learned, warned her gently. "They're talking," Mara said one morning, catching Zamaska in the hallway. "About you and the king." Zamaska's stomach tightened. "We just work. I clean the stables, I know." Mara squeezed her hand. "I'm just saying, be careful. Not everyone is happy you're here." The warning proved prescient. It was the 10th day when Rothel cornered her. Zamaska was in the feed room, measuring out portions of grain for the evening feeding. The work required concentration. Too much grain could make a horse sick, too little would leave them hungry. She was so focused, she didn't hear the footsteps behind her. Well, the little Omega is still here." Zamaska spun around, her heart jumping. A wolf she didn't recognize stood in the doorway, older, broad-shouldered, with gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes were cold, assessing. I'm working. If you need something." "What I need," the wolf said, stepping into the small room, "is to understand what a rejected Omega is doing in the Alpha King's stables." Zamaska pressed back against the grain bins. "I was sent to work. I'm just working." "Sent." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like a gift. Like property. Do you know who I am, Omega?" She shook her head. "Rothel, senior stable master. Been with Fenrite Keep for 20 years. And in all that time, I've never seen the Alpha King let some packless trash work his horses." The word hit like a slap. Trash. That's what they'd called her in the Eastern Pack, too. "I should leave." "You think working here changes what you are?" Rothel moved closer, blocking her path to the door. "You think because you sweep his floors and bat your eyes, you're suddenly worthy?" "I don't think anything. I just work." "Is that what you call it?" His voice dropped, turned ugly. "Did they send you to warm the king's bed? Is that your real job?" Zamaska's eyes filled with tears. She'd heard these accusations before, in a dozen different forms. That she was trying to seduce her way into favor. That her body was the only thing she could offer. That she was dirty, desperate, disgusting. "Please," she whispered. "Just let me pass." Rothel grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. "You don't give me orders, Omega. You're nothing here. Nothing but." The growl that split the air was primal, ancient, pure alpha command. Every hair on Zamaska's body stood on end. Every instinct screamed submit. Rothel's hand released her wrist instantly. He spun around, eyes wide. Heminal filled the feed room doorway. But this wasn't the quiet, gruff Alpha King she'd come to know. This was the warrior from the legends, eyes blazing gold, alpha power radiating from him in waves, so strong the air itself seemed to vibrate. "Release her!" The command was spoken quietly, but it rang with absolute authority. "Alpha King, I was just—" Rothel had dropped his eyes, his head bowed in automatic submission. "Release her!" Rothel stumbled backward, putting distance between himself and Zamaska. Heminal stepped into the room. The space suddenly felt impossibly small. "Mock her again, and you'll clean these stables with your teeth. Am I understood?" Rothel had gone pale. "Yes, Alpha King." "I meant no. AM. I understood." "Yes, Alpha King." "Get out!" Rothel fled, practically running from the stable. His footsteps echoed across the courtyard, then faded. Silence fell. Zamaska stood frozen, her back pressed against the grain bins, her wrist still tingling where Rothel had grabbed her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. Heminal's alpha power slowly receded, his eyes fading from gold back to amber. But his jaw was still tight, his fists still clenched. "Did he hurt you?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. Zamaska shook her head. She couldn't speak. "Let me see." It wasn't a request. Heminal crossed to her in 2 strides and gently took her wrist, the same one Rothel had grabbed. His touch was completely different. Careful. Warm. He examined the reddened skin, his thumb brushing over where Rothel's fingers had dug in. "It will bruise," he said quietly. "I'm fine. Really. He just scared me." Heminal's eyes met hers. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold still swimming in the amber. Could see the tension in his jaw, the barely leashed violence. No one touches what's under my protection, he said. Not even my own men. Especially not my own men. Zamaska's breath caught. Why? Why are you protecting me, Alpha King? He should have released her wrist. Should have stepped back. But he didn't. Because you work hard, he said. And you don't deserve cruelty for it. The feed room felt impossibly small. Impossibly warm. What's your name, Omega? He asked softly. She blinked. You know my name. I know what they call you. I'm asking what your name is. Your real name. Zamaska. My name is Zamaska. Zamaska. He repeated it slowly, carefully, like he was tasting each syllable. Like her name was something precious. When we're alone, call me Heminal. Her eyes widened. I can't, that's. Not when others are present, he continued. But when it's just us, use my name. But you're the Alpha King. And you're under my protection. He released her wrist, but didn't step back. Which means you have the right to address me by name. If you choose. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stable floor. Zamaska stood in the feed room long after he'd gone, cradling her wrist where he'd touched her. Where Rothel had grabbed her in cruelty, Heminal had touched her in care. No one had defended her in 6 years. Not since her rejection. Not since she became the pack's favorite joke. But Heminal of Fenrich, the ruthless Alpha King who killed rival alphas and ruled with iron will, had protected her. Had asked her real name. Had given her permission to use his. The walls she'd built around her heart trembled. And that terrified her more than his rage ever could. 2 weeks passed like a dream. Zamaska woke each morning with something she hadn't felt in years, anticipation. Not dread, not resignation. Actual anticipation for the day ahead. The stables had become her domain. Every tool in its place, every stall clean, every horse groomed and content. But more than that, the space had become something else entirely. A sanctuary. Heminal taught her without seeming to teach. He'd demonstrate how to mix the grain properly, different ratios for different horses, adjustments for age and activity level. He'd show her how to check a horse's hooves for stones, how to read the signs of colic or lameness. They worked in comfortable silence, most of the time. But occasionally, he would say something, an observation, a dry comment about the weather, once even something that might have been a joke, and she would respond. Brief exchanges that felt monumental simply because they existed. She learned things about him, too. Small things. He was left-handed. He had a scar on his right shoulder blade that looked like claw marks. He hated fish but would eat anything else without complaint. He stood on the battlements every night, regardless of weather, and watched over his territory like a sentinel. And he was lonely, so desperately lonely it made her chest ache. One afternoon, they were mending fence posts together, him holding the board steady while she hammered the nails. Their rhythm had synchronized without discussion. "You're humming again," he said. Zamaska stopped mid-hammer. "Sorry, don't apologize. I like it." She looked at him, surprised. His expression was neutral, but something in his eyes was soft. "It makes the keep feel." He paused, searching for the word. "Alive." Before she could respond, their hands brushed as she reached for another nail. The contact sent warmth flooding up her arm. She glanced up and found him already looking at her. For a moment, neither moved. Then Heminal cleared his throat and stepped back. "That should hold. We'll finish the rest tomorrow." He left quickly, leaving Zamaska standing there with her heart pounding and her mind racing with questions she didn't dare voice. But the peace couldn't last. The council met every week in the great hall. Zamaska had learned to avoid that corridor during meeting times. She had no business near pack politics, and the fewer wolves who noticed her, the better. But this week, she'd been asked to deliver fresh linens to the guest chambers. A visiting merchant wolf needed accommodations, and the regular servants were overwhelmed with preparations. The route took her past the council chamber. She wouldn't have stopped, wouldn't have listened, but she heard her name. "This Omega situation, my king. The servants are talking." Zamaska froze, her arms full of linens. "Let them talk." Heminal's voice was flat, bored. "It's more than talk." A different voice, older, stern. "Elder Morag," she thought. "You keep her here. You defend her publicly. You spend hours in the stables with her every day. I keep a good worker. That's all." "Is it?" Beta Bardalphus now, his tone carefully neutral. Because it's beginning to reflect poorly on Fenrike. She's rejected, my king. Scarred. No pack wants her. To harbor such refuse suggests weakness. Zamaska's breath stopped. Refuse. Heminal's fist slammed against the table. She heard it even through the door. She works harder than half the wolves in this keep. I won't throw out loyalty because of gossip. We're not suggesting you throw her out, Morik said carefully. Just limit her access. Keep her in the servant quarters. Make it clear she's only here as temporary labor. People are starting to whisper that she's your companion. Your pet. Silence. Let them whisper. Heminal's voice was deadly quiet. Dismissed. My king. I said dismissed. Footsteps approached the door. Zamaska turned and fled. The linens clutched to her chest. Her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. Pet refuse. Weakness. She delivered the linens on autopilot, then locked herself in her small room. She pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor. She'd begun to hope, begun to dream, begun to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she could belong here. That the Alpha King's protection meant something more than practical appreciation for good work. But the court saw what everyone else saw. A rejected Omega. Packless trash. A weakness in their king's armor. And they were right. Every day she stayed, she damaged Heminal's reputation. Made him look weak. Made him vulnerable to political attacks. Zamaska pressed her hands to her face and cried silently, the way she'd learned years ago. No sound. No gasps. Just tears streaming down her cheeks while her body shook. I have to leave. The next morning, she couldn't meet Heminal's eyes. You're quiet today, he observed, watching her sort through bridles with unusual intensity. I'm fine, Alpha King. She'd stopped using his name. Couldn't bear to say it when she knew she'd be leaving soon. Heminal frowned. Did something happen? No. I'm just tired. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie, but he didn't push. Instead, he worked nearby, his presence a constant warmth she tried desperately to ignore. That evening, she sat in her room and cried again. The work gloves he'd given her lay on the chest. The view from her window showed the battlements where he stood watch every night. She couldn't stay. Every moment here made things worse for him, but the thought of leaving felt like dying. On the morning of the third day after overhearing the council, Heminal cornered her in the tack room. Enough! His voice was firm. What happened? Nothing, Alpha King. I'm just. Don't lie to me, Zamaska. He used her name like a command, intimate and absolute. She broke. I heard them, she whispered. Your council. They think you're. I'm shaming you just by being here. Heminal's jaw clenched. You listen to their poison? I listen to truth. The words burst out before she could stop them. I'm rejected. Packless. I don't belong in a place like Fenrike Keep. Your court is right. My court, Heminal growled, is full of politicians who see threats in kindness and weakness in mercy. But they're right. Tears streamed down her face. I'm nothing. I have no pack, no bloodline, no value. Why do you even keep me here? Why do you care what happens to me? He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. Because when I look at you, I don't see what they see. What do you see? Someone who survived what would have broken others. Someone loyal. Someone who makes the stables feel less empty and the keep feel less cold. Someone. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Someone what? She whispered. Someone beautiful. The word hung in the air between them. Zamaska's breath stopped. What? Heminal seemed to realize what he'd said. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow. He left before she could respond. Zamaska sank to the floor of the tack room, her whole body trembling. Beautiful. No one had ever called her beautiful. Not before her rejection. Certainly not after. But the council's words echoed louder. Refuse. Pet weakness. She couldn't stay. Every day she remained. She damaged his reputation, his rule, his standing with his court. That night, Zamaska made her decision. She would leave at dawn. Before he could stop her. Before her heart broke completely. The hour before dawn was the loneliest time in Fenrike Keep. Zamaska sat on her narrow bed, her cloth bag packed and waiting. Inside, one spare dress, her wooden comb, the broken pieces of her bonding beads that she'd carried since her rejection. The work gloves Heminal had given her lay folded on top. She tried to leave them but couldn't. They were the first gift anyone had given her in 6 years. Silent tears streamed down her face. She thought she had no tears left, but apparently her body had infinite reserves when it came to leaving the one place she felt safe. The one person who'd made her feel seen. She pulled out a scrap of parchment and a piece of charcoal. Her hands shook as she wrote, "Thank you for your kindness, Alpha King. I will never forget it. But I cannot stay and watch your court turn against you because of me. Please forgive me. Z." Short. Simple. Inadequate. How could she possibly explain that leaving was killing her? That for the first time in 6 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be something more than a joke? She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She'd leave it in the stables, where he'd find it when he came to work. Zamaska stood, shouldering her bag. Took one last look at her room, the first space that had ever been truly hers. Then she slipped into the corridor. The keep was silent. Guards were changing shift, servants still asleep. No one saw her cross the courtyard. No one stopped her at the gates. She was invisible again. The way she'd always been. The way she was meant to be. The road away from Fenrich was dark, lit only by the fading stars. Zamaska walked quickly, her heart pounding, expecting any moment to hear footsteps behind her. But none came. She reached the tree line that marked the border of Fenrich territory and stopped. Turned. In the distance, Fenrich Keep rose against the lightning sky. Black stone and ancient towers. The battlements where Heminal stood watch every night alone. Except he wouldn't be alone. He'd been alone before she came. He'd be alone after she left. The thought made her chest ache so badly she could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the keep. To him. To the fragile dream she'd barely allowed herself to have. Then she turned back to the road and found Heminal standing 10 paces away. Zamaska gasped, stumbling backward. "How?" "Your scent woke me." His voice was rough, like he'd been running. He wore only trousers and a shirt, his feet bare, his hair disheveled. "I always know when you're near." Her heart hammered. "You shouldn't have come. I left a note. I found it." He held up the parchment. "Before I tracked you. Then you know why I have to leave." Tears streamed down her face again. "Your court. Damn my court." The words were raw. Desperate. "You don't understand." Zamaska's voice broke. "I'm nothing. Rejected. Broken. Worthless. I'll destroy your reputation." "You think I care about reputation?" He stepped closer. "You think I care what a bunch of politicians whisper in corners? You should. You're the Alpha King of Fenrich. Your court is turning against you because of me, and I can't. I won't be the reason you." "Stop." He closed the distance between them. "You want to know why I let you stay that first day?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Because when you looked at me, terrified, trembling, you didn't see the monster. You saw someone you understood. Someone else who'd been hurt." Zamaska's breath caught. "I don't understand." "I was rejected too, Zamaska." The words fell between them like stones. Silence. "What?" Heminal's jaw worked. "My fated mate, Sariel. She died in the Pack Wars 3 years ago. But before she died..." He stopped, his eyes distant with pain. "She chose another alpha. Said I was too violent, too cold. Said I'd never be able to love anything but battle." Zamaska's hand covered her mouth. The Alpha King. The legendary warrior. Rejected by his own mate. "I tried to change," he continued, his voice hollow. "Tried to be gentle. Soft. Everything she said I wasn't. But it was too late. She died hating me. Died believing I was a monster. Heminal. For 3 years I've ruled alone. Pushed everyone away. Became exactly what she said I was." His eyes met hers, raw and vulnerable. "Then you arrived. Sent as a joke. And you stayed. You worked. You didn't fear me, you understood me." Zamaska's tears fell faster. I can't. I'm not letting you go." His alpha command bled into his voice, but underneath it was pure desperation. "You can't command my heart." "I'm not commanding." He dropped to one knee before her. "I'm begging." Zamaska's breath stopped. The Alpha King. On his knees. For her. Behind them. She heard gasps, turned and saw guards at the tree line watching. Witnesses. Stay, Heminal said, his voice breaking. Not as a servant. Not as an Omega. Stay as. He couldn't finish. Zamaska dropped her bag and fell to her knees before him. As what? As mine. He cupped her face with shaking hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. If you'll have a broken Alpha King who doesn't know how to love but wants desperately to learn. She stared at him through her tears. At this powerful, lonely wolf who defended her, protected her, seen her as something more than a joke. I'm broken too, she whispered. Then we'll be broken together. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky gold and crimson. And there, on the border of Fenrike territory, the Alpha King knelt before a rejected Omega, their foreheads pressed together, their breaths mingling in the cold dawn air. The guards would talk. The court would rage. But for the first time in 3 years, Heminal didn't care. And for the first time in 6 years, Zamaska felt whole. I'll stay, she whispered. I'll stay. Heminal's arms wrapped around her, crushing her to his chest. She felt his body shudder, a sob he'd been holding back for years, finally breaking free. Thank you, he breathed against her hair. Thank you. They knelt there as the sun rose, two broken souls finding each other in the dawn. And for the first time, neither of them was alone. The week following Heminal's confession felt like living in a waking dream. Zamaska still worked the stables. It was her peace, her sanctuary, and she refused to give it up. But everything had shifted. Heminal no longer watched her from a distance. He worked beside her, their shoulders brushing, their hands meeting over shared tasks. They took meals together in the keep, not in the great hall where the court gathered, but in his private chambers. Simple meals of bread and meat and vegetables, eaten while they talked about everything and nothing. She learned about the wars he'd fought, the weight of ruling alone, the nightmares that still woke him some nights. He learned about her rejection ceremony, the years of mockery, the way she'd learned to make herself invisible just to survive. You're not invisible to me, he said one evening, his hand covering hers across the table. You never were. The court noticed, of course. Servants whispered. Guards exchanged knowing looks. But no one dared challenge the Alpha King directly. Until the letter arrived. Zamaska was in the stables, oiling saddles, when she heard raised voices from the keep. She stepped outside and saw Heminal standing in the courtyard, a parchment crumpled in his fist. Beta Bardalphus stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral. My king, we cannot simply refuse. Watch me. Heminal's voice was ice. They're within their rights. She's still registered as Eastern Pack. They have legal claim. Zamaska is not property. The words came out as a growl. Zamaska's stomach dropped. She crossed the courtyard, her heart pounding. What's happened? Heminal turned, his eyes still blazing gold. But they softened when he saw her. Nothing you need to worry about. Tell me, please. He handed her the parchment. It bore the Eastern Pack seal. Alpha King, Heminal of Fenrike, Beta Chang'is of the Eastern Pack requests formal audience to retrieve property borrowed from our territory. We will arrive in 3 days' time. By order of Pack law. Property. They were calling her property. They're coming here? Zamaska's voice shook. Let them come. Heminal's hand found hers, his grip warm and steady. You're under my protection. They have no claim on you. Actually, Beta Bardalphus said carefully, she's still registered in their census. Legally, they do have. Then we'll change the registration. Heminal's eyes flashed. She's Fenrike now. It's not that simple, my king. The process takes weeks. They'll be here in 3 days. Zamaska felt the walls closing in. Beta Chang'is, his daughters, all of them coming here, to mock her, to drag her back to the Omega quarters where she belonged. I'll go with them, she whispered. The hell you will. Heminal turned to her, his expression fierce. You're not going anywhere. If I don't, they could challenge you, could cause political conflict. Let them try. He cupped her face with both hands. I won't lose you to bureaucracy and pack politics. Not now. Not ever. Beta Bardalphus cleared his throat. My king, perhaps we should discuss this in council. There's nothing to discuss. Prepare the great hall for their arrival. And make it clear that Zamaska is under my personal protection. The Beta bowed and left, but Zamaska could see the concern in his eyes. 3 days. She had 3 days before facing the wolves who'd sent her here as a joke. They arrived precisely at noon on the 3rd day. Beta Chang'is, his 2 daughters, and 6 Eastern Pack warriors. They rode through Fenrik's gates like they owned the place, their horses prancing, their armor gleaming. Zamaska watched from an upper window as they dismounted in the courtyard. Her hands trembled against the stone sill. "You don't have to face them." Heminal stood behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Yes, I do. I ordered you to stay in the keep, away from the hall." She turned to face him. "And I'm asking you to let me be there. I can't hide forever." His jaw clenched. "They'll try to hurt you. With words, if not actions." "I know." She took his hand. "But I'm not the same Omega they sent away. Because of you." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe. Or fear. "Stay in the gallery, then. Out of sight until I call for you." She nodded. The great hall of Fenrik was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, black stone walls, ancient weapons mounted on every surface. The throne sat on a raised dais, carved from a single piece of dark wood and inlaid with silver. Heminal sat there now, every inch the Alpha King. His formal regalia made him look even more imposing. Silver crown, black furs, the ceremonial sword of Fenrik across his knees. Zamaska watched from the upper gallery, hidden in shadows. Beta Chang'is approached the throne with practiced deference. His daughters followed, their faces smug. "Alpha King Heminal," Chang'is said, bowing. "Thank you for receiving us. State your business." Heminal's voice was flat, bored. "We've come to collect our Omega, my king. The one we lent for stable work." Lent. Like she was a tool. A bucket. A broom. "We hope she wasn't too much trouble," one daughter said, barely suppressing a giggle. "We know she's difficult." "Is the barn cleaner at least?" the other added. "That's all she's good for." The Fenrik court bristled at the disrespect, but Heminal remained motionless. "Zamaska," he said carefully, "has proven herself an invaluable member of this keep." Chang'is actually laughed. "Zamaska? You learned the reject's name? How quaint." Zamaska's hands clenched on the gallery railing. She should stay hidden, should let Heminal handle this. But she couldn't. She stepped out of the shadows and began descending the great staircase. Every head turned. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, nothing presumptuous. But she'd braided her hair with care, and she held her head high. The Eastern Pack wolf stared, then snickered. "Look," one daughter stage whispered. "She thinks she belongs here." "Did you train her to fetch too, Alpha King?" the other added. "She's very good at fetching." Cruel laughter echoed through the hall. Zamaska reached the floor and crossed toward the throne. Her legs shook, but she didn't stop. Beta Chang'is stepped forward, blocking her path. "Come, Omega. Your joke has run its course. Time to go home." Zamaska met his eyes. "I am home." Shocked silence. Chang'is' expression darkened. "You refuse your Beta's command?" "I am no longer Eastern Pack." The first daughter shrieked with laughter. "Did you hear that? She thinks because the king let her clean his stables, she's Fenrik now." "You're nothing but the king's barn maid," the second daughter sneered. "His pet." The word echoed through the great hall. Pet property. Possession. Then Heminal stood. The entire hall went silent. His presence filled the space. Ancient. Powerful. Absolutely deadly. Alpha power radiated from him in waves that made every wolf in the room want to submit. "You will not speak to her that way in my hall." Each word was a command that resonated in the bones. "With respect, Alpha King," Chang'is said, his voice strained. "She's a rejected Omega. We can speak to her, however. She is under my protection." Heminal descended the dais, each step measured. "Dangerous. Your protection, yes, but she's still registered as mine." The word crashed through the room like thunder. Alpha power exploded outward, forcing every wolf, including Chang'is, to drop their eyes in submission. Zamaska gasped. The bond between them flared, warm and golden and absolutely undeniable. Chang'is slowly raised his eyes, disbelief written across his face. "You can't possibly mean—" "Summon the full court," Heminal commanded, his eyes never leaving Zamaska. "I have a claim to make." His hand extended toward her. Waiting. Zamaska's heart stopped. A claim. Before the court, before witnesses, the Eastern Pack wolves looked at each other in shock. The Fenrike court erupted in whispers. And Heminal stood there, hand outstretched, eyes only on her, waiting. Zamaska stepped forward and placed her hand in his. The great hall of Fenrike held its breath, and the joke that began in cruelty transformed into something else entirely. Prophecy. Within an hour, every ranking wolf in Fenrike crowded into the great hall. Zamaska had never seen so many wolves in one place. Elders in their formal robes, warriors in dress armor, servants pressed against the back walls, straining to see. The Eastern Pack delegation stood on one side of the hall, the Fenrike court on the other. And Zamaska stood alone in the center, trembling. Heminal had returned to the throne, dressed in full ceremonial regalia. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful, ancient, untouchable. But his eyes never left hers. Elder Morik stepped forward, his expression troubled. Alpha King, before you proceed, I must counsel you to reconsider. To claim a rejected Omega violates. What does it violate, Elder? Heminal's voice was calm, deadly calm. Morik hesitated. Tradition, pack law, the dignity of the crown. Show me the law that forbids it. There is no written law, my king, but precedent. Precedent, Heminal said softly, is not law. Next objection. Silence fell. Then Beta Bardalphus stepped forward, his face grave. My king, even if this is legal, it's unwise. His voice was gentle, almost pleading. She brings nothing to this union. No alliance, no power, no bloodline. The court will. The court, Heminal interrupted, will accept my decision, or find new employment. Gasps rippled through the hall. Heminal stood and descended from the throne. He walked towards Zamaska, his boots echoing on the stone floor. This Omega brings loyalty, he said, his voice carrying to every corner. She brings courage. She brings strength that isn't measured in battles or bloodlines. He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She brings the one thing this keep has lacked for 3 years. His eyes met hers. Hard. Zamaska's breath caught. Tears streamed down her face. From the Eastern Pack side, one of Changi's daughters couldn't help herself. She's just a barn girl, your majesty. The rejected Omega no one wanted, the other added. Beta Changi stepped forward, his face red. You would shame your crown for her? She's been rejected by her own fated mate. She's scarred, packless. She's perfect, Heminal said quietly. The hall erupted in chaos. Wolves shouting, arguing, some in support, most in shock. Heminal raised his hand. Instant silence. He turned to face the full assembly, but kept one hand extended towards Zamaska. She took it, and he pulled her to stand beside him. You're right, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. She was rejected. Zamaska's heart cracked. Of course he would see reason, would listen to his court. Rejected by a fool who couldn't see her worth. Her eyes flew to his face. Heminal addressed the assembly, but his words felt like they were meant only for her. This Omega has worked harder than wolves twice her rank, has shown more honor than those born to privilege, has asked for nothing and given everything. He turned to her fully now, taking both her hands in his. She has healed something in me I thought was dead forever. Heminal, she whispered. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then he turned back to the court. Let it be known before all packs, before the ancestors, before the moon herself. The formal words of claiming. Zamaska's heart hammered, so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. That I, Heminal of Fenrike, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, choose Zamaska as my mate, my equal, my queen. He looked down at her, his eyes soft. If you'll have me. The hall faded away. The court, the Eastern Pack, all of it disappeared. There was only Heminal, looking at her like she was something precious, something chosen. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes. He cupped her face gently, tilting her head to expose her neck. The old rejection scar was visible to everyone, a jagged mark where she'd clawed at a bond that never took. This will hurt, he said softly, but only for a moment. I trust you. Heminal's eyes flashed gold. Then he lowered his head and marked her. The claiming bite was nothing like she'd imagined. Sharp pain, yes, but followed immediately by a rush of warmth that flooded through her entire body. She felt the bond snap into place, golden and unbreakable, tying her soul to his. The mark glowed silver beneath his mouth, ancient magic responding to the claim. When he lifted his head, she could see it in the reflection of his eyes, a mark in the shape of a crown and wolf, directly over the old scar, making something beautiful from something broken. The hall exploded in gasps and whispers, but Zamaska barely heard them. The bond thrummed between her and Heminal, warm and real and absolutely permanent. Heminal turned to face the court, pulling Zamaska against his side. "I present my chosen mate," he declared. "Your future queen." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Beta Bardalphus stepped forward. He met Zamaska's eyes, and something in his expression had changed. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. He dropped to one knee. "My queen!" One by one, the Fenrite court followed, wolves dropping to their knees in acknowledgement, in acceptance, in respect. The Eastern Pack stood frozen, humiliated. Beta Chang'i's face was purple with rage. His daughters looked like they might be sick. Heminal's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You came to collect an Omega. You leave having insulted a queen. I suggest you go. Now." "This isn't," Chang'i started. "Now." The alpha command in that single word forced every Eastern Pack wolf to step backward. They fled the hall in disgrace, practically running for the courtyard. As they left, Zamaska heard one of the daughters whisper, "This isn't over." But she didn't care. The bond thrummed between her and Heminal, warm, real, permanent. She touched the mark on her neck, feeling the raised silver lines. Her mark, her mate, her choice. The great hall slowly emptied. The Fenrite wolves approached one by one to bow before their new queen, some with joy, some with reservation, but all with respect. Zamaska stood there, Heminal's hand in hers, watching her entire world transform. The rejected Omega, the barnmaid, the joke, now the queen of Fenrike. She looked up at Heminal, and he smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. "What have we done?" she whispered. "Changed everything," he answered. Then he kissed her before the entire court, and the hall erupted in cheers. Zamaska woke to sunlight streaming through windows she still wasn't used to. The Alpha King's chambers, their chambers now, were vast compared to her little servant's room. The bed alone was larger than her entire previous space. Tapestries hung on the walls. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner. Everything spoke of power, of permanence. It terrified her. "You're thinking too loud." She turned to find Heminal already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with those amber eyes that still made her breath catch. "I'm just processing. Regrets." His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the vulnerability underneath. "Only that I didn't stay the first day you gave me water." The tension in his shoulders released. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, tucking herself against his chest. The bond hummed contentedly between them. "The court will challenge us," she said quietly. "Some of them didn't look happy yesterday. Some of them are never happy." His hand traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "They'll adjust, or they'll leave. Either way, you're my mate now. They'll have to accept it. And if they don't, then I'll remind them why I'm Alpha King." His voice held an edge of steel. "I've ruled alone for 3 years. I'm not going back to that. Not for anyone." Zamaska tilted her head to look at him. "You're not alone anymore." "No," he agreed softly. "I'm not." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other in the quiet morning light. Then Heminal's stomach growled, and Zamaska laughed, actually laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Come on, Alpha King. Let's feed you before you waste away." "That's your majesty now, my queen." The title still felt wrong on her. Too big, too grand. But she'd learn. The following weeks were an exercise in transformation. Some members of the court warmed to Zamaska immediately. Mara, the young servant, cried with joy and became her constant companion. Several of the warriors' mates reached out with cautious friendship. Even Beta Bardalphus, while reserved, treated her with genuine respect. Others remained cold. Elder Morik avoided her entirely. Lady Serald, a high-ranking she-wolf from an old bloodline, made her disdain clear with cutting looks and carefully worded insults. But Zamaska had survived 6 years of mockery in the Eastern Pack. She knew how to endure. What surprised her was how much she had to learn. Pack law, political alliances, the complex web of relationships between territories, how to address visiting dignitaries, the proper protocols for formal dinners, the history of Fenrich stretching back centuries. Heminel taught her patiently, but it was overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly disastrous attempt at a formal dinner where she'd used the wrong honorific for a visiting elder, Zamaska fled to the stables. Her sanctuary, her peace. She found a brush and started grooming one of the horses, letting the familiar rhythm calm her racing thoughts. She didn't belong in great halls with silver platters and formal speeches. She belonged here, with hay and leather and simple, honest work. Thought I might find you here. Heminel leaned against the stall door, still wearing his formal dinner clothes, his crown slightly askew. I'm sorry I left. I couldn't, her voice broke. You needed space. He entered the stall, taking a second brush and working on the horse's other side. I understand. They groomed in comfortable silence for a while. Then Zamaska whispered, I don't know how to be a queen. Good thing you don't have to be. She looked up, confused. You just have to be Zamaska, Heminel continued. The rest we'll figure out together. But the court will adjust. You're not here to perform for them. You're here because you're my mate. Because I chose you and you chose me. That's all that matters. Tears pricked her eyes. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Everything else is just noise. He set down the brush and crossed to her side of the stall. You want to visit the stables every morning? Visit them. You want to eat breakfast in our chambers instead of the great hall? We'll eat there. You want to learn politics slowly at your own pace? We'll go slowly. But queens don't. This queen does. He cupped her face. You're not like anyone who's come before. That's not a weakness. That's your strength. She leaned into his touch. I'm scared. I know. So am I. That startled her. You're the Alpha King. You're not afraid of anything. I'm terrified, he admitted. Terrified I'll fail you. That I'll be too cold, too violent, too much of what Sariel said I was. That you'll realize you made a mistake choosing a broken Alpha King. Zamaska grabbed his hands. You're not broken. You're healing. We both are. Then we'll heal together, he said. And we'll rule together. However that looks. Whatever form it takes. She kissed him then, there in the stable that had started everything, surrounded by hay and leather and the smell of horses. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Come on, Heminel said. I think there's still dessert at that dinner you fled. Can we eat it here? Absolutely. 2 months after the claiming, a letter arrived. Eastern Pack had allied with the Silver Ridge Pack. Together, they were formally challenging Heminel's right to claim a rejected Omega as queen. They demanded he renounce the bond or face political sanctions from the Allied Pack's council. The council erupted into chaos. They can't do this, Beta Bardelpha snarled. The claiming was legal, but unprecedented, Elder Morik said quietly. And precedent carries weight in the council. So what do they want? Heminel's voice was ice. For me to reject my own mate? They want you weakened, Lady Serald said, surprising everyone by speaking up. They think this makes Fenrich vulnerable. Then they're idiots, Zamaska said. Every head turned to her. She stood, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. They think I make you weak. That I make Fenrich weak. So we show them they're wrong. How? Bardelphus asked, not unkindly. An Interpack summit. Here. At Fenrich. She looked at Heminel. We invite the Allied Pax Council. Let them see our strength. Let them see that Fenrich isn't weakened by our bond. It's strengthened by it. The council stared at her. Then Heminel smiled. My queen has spoken. Make the arrangements. 3 months later, Fenrich Keep hosted the largest gathering of packs in a generation. Zamaska stood in the great hall, dressed in formal robes of silver and black, the queen's crown resting on her braided hair. She'd spent weeks learning protocol, studying pack law, preparing for every possible challenge. The Allied Pack's council watched with skeptical eyes as Heminel presented the trade agreements Fenrich had negotiated, the territorial disputes they'd resolved, the prosperity their rule had brought. Then Beta Changi stood, his face smug, all very impressive Alpha King. But the question remains, how can a rejected Omega possibly stand as queen? Before Hymenael could respond, Zamaska rose. You're right, Beta Changis. I was rejected. Her voice carried through the hall, clear and strong. Rejected, mocked, sent to clean stables as a joke. You expected me to fail. I expected the Alpha King to throw me out like trash. She walked down the dais, approaching the Eastern Pact delegation. But he didn't. He saw something you couldn't. Not a weakness. Strength. The strength to survive rejection. The strength to work harder than anyone expected. The strength to stand here now and tell you that your cruelty didn't break me. It forged me. She turned to address the full assembly. I didn't bring bloodlines or alliances or political power. I brought loyalty, dedication, and love for an Alpha King who'd forgotten how to be anything but alone. If that makes me unworthy to be queen, then your definition of worth is flawed. Silence fell. Then one of the neutral pack elders stood. The Queen of Fenrike speaks with wisdom. I vote to recognize the claim. One by one, the other packs followed. Even Silver Ridge, after a long pause, bowed their heads in acceptance. Beta Changi sat down, defeated. Hymenael's hand found hers, squeezing gently. They'd won. 6 months after the summit, Zamaska stood in the stables, watching a young Omega sort grain. The girl had arrived yesterday, sent from a neighboring pack, as a joke, to clean the queen's stables. She was timid, scarred, broken in ways Zamaska recognized intimately. You're doing well, Zamaska said gently. The girl jumped, nearly dropping the scoop. I'm sorry, my queen, I didn't mean to. You have nothing to apologize for. Zamaska offered her hand. Welcome to Fenrike. You're safe here. The girl's eyes filled with tears. They said you'd have me thrown out. They were wrong. Zamaska smiled. Come, let me show you around. Everyone starts somewhere. I started here too. As she led the girl through the stables, explaining each task, each tool, Zamaska felt the circle completing. She'd been that frightened Omega once. Sent as a joke, expected to fail. Now she was giving another broken soul the same chance she'd been given. That evening, she stood with Hymenael on the keep's battlements, looking out over Fenrike. Do you remember the first day? She asked. When you told me to go home. I was an idiot. He pulled her closer. You said you didn't need help from someone sent as a joke. I was wrong. I needed you more than I knew. He kissed her temple. You saved me, Zamaska. We saved each other. She placed his hand on her stomach, where the first flutter of new life grew. And now we'll save one more. Hymenael froze. Are you? Yes. He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead to her stomach, and she heard him whisper, Thank you. Thank you. The moon rose full and silver over Fenrike Keep, casting light over the Alpha King and his queen. In the distance, wolves howled, not in challenge, but in celebration. What began as cruelty became legend. What began as mockery became prophecy. They sent her to shame him. Instead, she taught him mercy, and the Alpha King refused to let her go.